GamingBolt presents 15 things you need to know before you buy Mass Effect Andromeda. At long last, after a 5-year-long wait, fans around the world will get to play the latest installment in the BioWare space opera series. Mass Effect Andromeda promises a new breed of experiences for the franchise. A game that delivers on a new story, new characters, new locales, and all new mechanics. This is, in a lot of ways, quintessentially Mass Effect. But in a lot of other ways, this is completely unlike anything before it in the series. Fans would do well to know what it is they're getting into with this new game. Here are 15 things you absolutely must know about Andromeda before you buy it. Set 600 years after the trilogy. Mass Effect Andromeda is the 4th game in the series, but in terms of the narrative and the story it plans on telling, it is distancing itself from the original trilogy a great deal. The Andromeda Initiative, what serves as the centerpiece of the story's foundation in Andromeda, leaves the Milky Way galaxy after Mass Effect 2 ends, but before Mass Effect 3 begins. And by the time they get to Andromeda and wake up from cryosleep, it's 600 years later. This should set up some interesting stories, since while we know how the trilogy ended, the characters in the new game don't. Expect to hear questions about the Reapers and Cerberus, even if they do not make appearances themselves. That said, Cerberus may appear. Keen-eyed fans have been analyzing footage and screenshots from Mass Effect Andromeda in great detail over the past few weeks, and according to plenty of people, there's a good chance the pro-human extremist organization Cerberus, which was led by the Elusive Man in Mass Effect 2 and 3, might be making an appearance in the upcoming Andromeda. In fact, the organization might even play an important role in the story itself. Are they one of the private organizations funding the initiative? What role could they play even 600 years after the conclusion of the previous trilogy? There are a lot of lingering questions about Cerberus, and we cannot wait to hear the answers. No canon trilogy ending. Depending on how you played the Mass Effect trilogy, Mass Effect 3 could have ended in any number of ways, but BioWare have pointed out several times none of the endings are canon. This also means that the decisions made by players at the end of Mass Effect 3, while crucial to the fate of the Milky Way galaxy, won't count at all in Andromeda, seeing as the Andromeda Initiative leaves the galaxy before Mass Effect 3 even begins, and that makes a lot of sense, and has probably allowed BioWare to write with a lot more freedom without having to worry about the alternative paths and branching stories. Soft reboot. Almost. While Mass Effect Andromeda is still very much Mass Effect at its core, it feels very much like a clean slate for BioWare to work with. A soft reboot after a fashion, though not in a strict sense. It takes place in an entirely new galaxy. There is an all-new cast of characters. The threats and stakes from the original trilogy are, more or less, gone. There are going to be a lot of new alien races for us to encounter, and even the gameplay is receiving several major upgrades, which we'll discuss in a bit. While it doesn't do away with everything that the first 3 Mass Effect games did the way a reboot would do, and while this is still, strictly speaking, a sequel, it feels like a fresh beginning in a lot of ways, and that is an exciting prospect. Not all alien races from the trilogy will return. Meeting all new alien races in the latest Mass Effect games make a lot of sense, considering the fact that this takes place in an entirely new galaxy altogether. But we also do not want to completely do away with all the races we've come to know and understand during the course of the Shepard trilogy. And while major races like the Krogans, Solarians, Asari, and the Turians are going to return in Mass Effect Andromeda, there are several races that will not be making a comeback. For instance, the Quarians do not seem to be a part of the initiative, though we do not know for sure if they will return or not. And we can be fairly certain that races like the Hanar and the Batarians won't be making any appearances. But there will be a lot of new ones. 2 of the new alien races that are to be introduced in Mass Effect Andromeda have been revealed so far, possibly because they will have an important role to play in the story. The Ket are going to be the main antagonist race, led by the villain who calls himself Archon, whereas a new race called the Angara has also been shown off, one of whom will also possibly be a squad mate for players. We cannot wait to see more of the new alien races from the Andromeda galaxy, so that we can explore their worlds, learn their histories, and understand their culture. That is, after all, one of the many joys of a typical Mass Effect experience. No returning characters. There's no denying it, we all love Garrus, Liara is the best alien of all time, and Thane is one of the most fascinating characters the series has ever had, and it sucks to know that we're never going to see them again. Considering the placement of Andromeda in the franchise's chronology, it makes perfectly logical sense that none of Shepard's squad mates are going to return, but that doesn't make it any less painful for us. That said, we're excited to meet the new characters in Andromeda. Hopefully they'll have as much of a lasting impact on players as Mass Effect characters usually do. From rookie to hero. When we took control of Shepard in the very first Mass Effect, he was already a widely known and well-respected figure in the Milky Way galaxy. He was on the verge of becoming a Spectre, for crying out loud, and by the time we finished his story in Mass Effect 3, he had transcended even that. The Shepard had become a galactic legend. In Mass Effect Andromeda though, Scott and Sarah Ryder, who serve as the two main protagonists, are going to be nobodies when we start off, and BioWare aim to tell their personal tales of growth and how they go from being young, untested rookies and ultimately transform into heroes. It's bound to be an interesting tale, especially seeing as we've never seen anything like it in the context of a Mass Effect universe, and we cannot wait to see what the journey of Pathfinder holds for us. Freeform exploration. While Mass Effect 2 and 3 were intensive, singular experiences with a laser-sharp focus on the progression of a story and nothing else, it should be remembered that back in 2007, when the franchise started out, it placed a great deal of emphasis on exploration, especially with its much maligned Mako sections. Mass Effect Andromeda, it seems, will be similarly focused on exploration, and while BioWare have shied away from calling it an open-world game, they have said that it will have open-world elements and sections. While the inclusion of the new vehicle known as Nomad, which is essentially a Mako and hopefully it won't suck, Andromeda will have large varied environments to explore throughout the galaxy. While we do not expect it to be what No Man's Sky planned to be, but ultimately couldn't become, we still cannot wait to see just how layered and deep this focus on exploration in the Mass Effect Andromeda game will be. Loyalty missions. Remember the loyalty missions. Of course you do. Loyalty missions were at the heart of Mass Effect 2. They were what made the game so damn good. And since Mass Effect 2 is the best game in the trilogy, it can be said in a way that loyalty missions are the best thing in Mass Effect to date. Well, at least they're in the top 2. And they will be included in Mass Effect Andromeda as well. And no, they won't be a focal point like they were in Mass Effect 2, they probably won't be as important to the development and the progression of the main narrative arc itself. But BioWare have confirmed that the concept and structure of loyalty missions will be included in Andromeda in some way, shape, and form, and we're intrigued to see how that will work out. The Witcher 3 style side missions. One of the biggest fears people have for Mass Effect Andromeda is that in its efforts to be more focused on exploration and being a more open-ended experience, like BioWare's very own Dragon Age Inquisition, it will lose some of that tight focus Mass Effect games typically have on their own storytelling aspects. Fans are afraid that, like Inquisition, Andromeda might end up having MMO-style boring and monotonous side quests that have little or nothing to do with the story itself. However, BioWare have publicly come out and made assurances that they are taking cues from several games, most notably The Witcher 3, while designing their side quests. It seems like side missions in Mass Effect Andromeda won't be poorly designed, bland, and isolated stories, but rather will weave in and out of the main narrative itself, and hopefully have an impact on how it unfolds as well, much like The Witcher 3 itself. Revamped combat. While combat in Mass Effect 2 and 3 was slick and fast-paced, the series essentially stopped being an RPG after the original Mass Effect, and turned into a cover-based third-person shooter. And credit where credit's due, that actually worked very well. But with Andromeda, BioWare are looking to reintroduce some depth and complexity to the combat mechanics of the series, and as such, they've made some significant changes. Firstly, gone is the cover system. Players will now automatically take cover behind objects a la The Last of Us, which means there will be a larger focus on mobility during action sequences, a hypothesis which is further verified by the inclusion of jetpacks. There will also be a larger focus on melee attacks, and players will no longer be able to pause the game during combat to pull up the traditional weapons and abilities wheel. Oh, and there's also a new class system. No more traditional class system. At the beginning of each Mass Effect game, or just the first one if you've stuck with a single save throughout the entire trilogy, while customizing your very own Commander Shepard, players were asked to select a class for their character. a class we would then stick with for a very long time. However, that is no longer going to be the case. Instead, players will be able to develop their character through a large and varied skill tree to suit their playstyles, and choose up to 2 abilities for the characters at a time. This should theoretically allow for more flexibility in combat, while also allowing players to fiddle around and experiment with abilities and classes, so color us cautiously optimistic. No more Paragon or Renegade. Many would say that the Paragon and Renegade mechanic is the identity of the Mass Effect series. So, understandably, the news that it would be absent in the upcoming Andromeda was met with reactions that were mixed at best and negative at worst. However, BioWare's reasoning actually makes sense. They say that the Paragon and Renegade mechanic was very Shepard, and seeing as Commander Shepard won't be playing a part in Andromeda, it makes sense to remove it altogether so that the game could build an identity of its own. BioWare have also talked about how they want to move away from the binary good and bad decisions in favor of more morally gray ones, and that couldn't work very well if the Paragon and Renegade system was still a thing. We do, however, know for a fact that cutscene interrupts will still be featured in Andromeda, so we're curious to see how that will work. Enhanced Dialogue Wheel. With the Paragon and Renegade system no longer being relevant in Mass Effect Andromeda, the Dialogue Wheel also needed a facelift, and it looks like it's gotten one. Rather than good or bad, players will now have dialogue choices that essentially hinge on whether the player agrees or disagrees. This means that dialogue and decisions should become a much more immersive and active part of the gameplay than before, and that dialogue choices should theoretically feel much more important. And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at GamingBolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.